All right. Hi, everybody. Good morning. Happy Monday. My name is Aparna, and I'm super excited to have you join us for Data is Love. We've been doing this for 3 months, and we've had some really incredible conversations with experts that work in lots of different industries. And today I'm really excited to have one of our team members on this session. So I want to introduce everybody to Fee Tineman. She's so brilliant, so great, and she's studying something that frankly I think all of us have and interested in, which is pay transparency. So hi Fee, will you just start with telling us a little bit about yourself, your career journey, and how you landed on this topic for your PhD? How did you land on pay transparency?
Yeah, I'm happy to share that. I basically grew up in an immigrant household, and I got to learn firsthand sort of what happens to employees and workers and manual laborers who are not sort of like advocated for in our communities and society. Like they're overlooked, taken advantage of, and just atrocious work practices. And I just felt this fury as a little kid that needs to change. And so I found this intersection of psychology and the workplace and just like improving workplaces through industrial organizational psychology. And so I decided to pursue my PhD in this field. Dream job is to maybe help write policy for the Department of Labor. I'm just gonna put that out there into the universe one day to revamp our systems. And I'm just really excited to see everything that's going on with the unions gain momentum these days too. So that's sort of a brief snippet of how I became to be here. But mainly, I picked pay transparency because it's multifolded. But so as I mentioned, I grew up with a single mom who was a manicurist working for really low wages, 13-hour days, 6 days a week. And we really struggled. And I just assumed that, this is just the way things are because of our circumstances. She's like barely has a fifth grade education from Vietnam, and it's like lack of education, lack of like opportunity and all this stuff. But as I went to college, I discovered that it's beyond that. It happens to women who are educated as well, who have high school degree or a college degree. I have started to learn statistics like that in some industries, women collectively earn billions of dollars less than their counterparts. In fact, physicians and surgeons who are women are paid 19 billion less annually than physicians who are male. And we also hear a statistic that is often cited that like women earn 82 cents for every dollar men earn. And then also like women could, because of that, like over time gets compounded, women lose up to like $500,000 in their overall lifetime, and $800,000 if she is college educated.
So
So yeah.
Okay, so I have a question, right? I think one of the myths that we hear is that it's only people that have less than a bachelor's degree that are experiencing some of the largest pay gaps. And I think that what's true is that the more education that you have, oftentimes the wider that gap is. Um, and there's just some like buzzwords and stats that get passed around, right? And like you mentioned one of them, which is the 82 cents to a dollar. Can you talk a little bit about the difference between the uncontrolled pay gap and a controlled pay gap?
Yeah, that's a really good point. That's a really good distinction. The uncontrolled pay gap is what you're hearing now, meaning people potentially from different jobs are compared to each other. But when you control all of those variables and factors, and a woman and a man has the same job, then that pay gap closes, but it's still not equal. It's smaller, but it's not equal. So that's a good distinction. But I mean, our society is still facing the fact that like women aren't offered the same jobs as men, even though they might be qualified, as we saw recently with the Supreme Court hearings. You know, like that is still a very problematic issue.
Yeah. Yeah. So I'm just curious, like, why is it that we don't call that gap what it is, which is an opportunity gap, right? Like we have so much evidence now that shows us that men and women enter the workforce in really almost equal numbers, and 30 years down the road, we see 70% of top leadership roles occupied by men, and 30%, or I think it's 34% roughly, that's occupied by women, and a real small sliver of that is women of color. So why is it that we don't call it what it is, which is an opportunity gap?
Yeah, that's a good point. I think there are multiple issues happening. One, as women, we have certain societal roles and gender roles that we still hold that we haven't completely gotten rid of. And also, like, there aren't policies that in place that are supportive of like maternity leave. Like, there's just it's a complex issue. And to be frank, I think it's unsexy to say it's an uncontrolled or opportunity gap. Like, it's not as catchy, it's not like attention grabbing. And so I think oftentimes just to even make a point, people like to say something that's so dramatic to get the headlines these days, to make a point that this is still an issue. Like, this is still a problem, and this pay gap is still atrocious.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. All right. So yes, we talk about things in a way that's sexy, that's attention grabbing. I want to take a small pivot from our conversation, speaking of attention grabbing, to show people that are watching this video I think it's one of the videos that we both really, really love. And so we're going to show this video, and it features two capuchin monkeys. The type of monkey that they are is probably less important, but you're going to watch this experiment where the researcher is essentially offering these two monkeys treats, and one treat is a grape, which the monkeys love, and the other treat is a cucumber, which the monkeys will eat if there's no other option. But they don't love it as much. So let's watch that for a second.
Yeah.
So she gives a rock to us, that's the task. And we give her a piece of cucumber and she eats it. The other one needs to give a rock to us. And that's what she does. And she gets a grape. And she eats it. The other one sees that. She gives a rock to us now, gets again cucumber.
Wow. Well, suffice to say, people are probably even more susceptible to those feelings of like, if they feel discriminated against, that they will be equally upset to the, let me out of here. Fix
right.
me.
And we've seen that a lot, right? Like, I mean, as much as I think people call it the Great Resignation, and how folks are leaving the workforce in droves, which they have, and women in particular have, I think that deep down inside, all of us have an orientation towards fairness. We want things to be fair, and when they're not fair, we're like that monkey that's throwing the cucumber back, because it's like, you know what? I don't want that. Like, I want a grape because I did the thing that you asked me to do, right? Like, I gave you the rock, and now I want a grape because that's like the going rate for performing this activity. So it makes me think a lot about pay secrecy, right? And there are lots of sort of workplace expectations that you don't talk about money. And certainly I remember in my very first job out of grad school, there was actually a sentence in my offer letter that said, you are prohibited to discuss your compensation information with your colleagues and there are consequences, right? And so it listed the consequences, and being dismissed, right? Like getting fired from your job was one of the consequences. And so like, who prefers pay secrecy? Who are the people that want it and why?
It's a very jaded, I'm going to be coming from a very jaded perspective, so bear with me. But people who prefer pay secrecy are the people benefiting from the current system. And they are the ones with a higher tolerance for inequity. They can negotiate better and benefit from receiving higher pay. And as we know, like women face backlash when they try to negotiate and advocate for themselves in the workplace. And people who like their privacy, they want to have this sort of information about their pay to be only between them and HR. And there's also a generation dynamic that I'm seeing too, where older generation, no, not to say all, but most prefer pay secrecy, because I think there's this sort of idea that when you work for an organization and you show loyalty, like they will show you loyalty, they will take care of me. There's this sort of like a affinity and respect for an authority figure that we don't quite see with younger generations, say Gen Z and Millennials. And my theory is that we as Millennials and Gen Zs like grew up with the Great Recession. We saw our families lose jobs, companies, severing relationships that our parents had given to these organizations for 30 years, like tossed aside, so disposable. And we also saw a lot of scandals like growing up, and we have this mistrust. We also see that banks aren't taking care of our communities. It's just out there to make a quick dollar, despite the havocs on our systems and our environment. So we find that the best ways that we need to advocate for ourselves and our generations, and through that is through pay, like accountability, more transparency. We want to see what's happening. So
yeah. And we've seen some of that get legislated, right? Because employers have a lot of really bad behaviors and habits. And in the state of Washington, I think we're pretty lucky to have laws in place that allow us to both talk about what we make with our peers without negative consequences, but also that our employers can't ask us for prior salary history and use that to offer us lower compensation. So I wanna pivot a little bit to your research. You're pretty close to wrapping up your PhD. I'm super excited. And you have a lot of data, right? Like you're learning a lot. And one of the things that surprised me when you were talking about your research was that there are a lot of myths about like who cares the most about pay transparency. And we often think that it's Gen Z and younger millennials, right, that have come into the workforce, having witnessed now 2 recessions in a period of 10 years. But you said it's actually everybody. Like everybody cares about pay transparency. And so, will you talk a little bit about what you've learned, like in the studies that you've conducted?
Yeah. So in my basic model, I looked at a few things. We first offered pay transparency, a condition where there is a lot of transparency on pay as one organization that offered that, and then another company that just offered the standard pay secrecy, like you don't know what's happening. And then I compared what people preferred, that's the pay transparency condition or the secrecy condition. And I evaluated that on fairness to see which company was perceived to be more fair and which ones has more, or people attracted to more organizationally, and whether or not they will follow through with like applying to work there. So application intention. And so overall, in my pilot study, we found that people across the board, regardless of any demographic group, race, gender, age, industry even, they preferred the pay transparency company over the secrecy one. And that says a lot, because I think that something's happening now where people just prefer like more transparency from organizations, more of that corporate social responsibility we're hearing, especially after, the Me Too movement, the BLM movement. People just want more accountability from organizations.
Yeah, some of the stats that you shared with me that were pretty wild is that, like, when it comes to being attracted to a company, like 45% more for companies that offer pay transparency, right? So I'm more likely to be interested in an employer that's transparent. And then also, right, like 27% more likely to apply for a job at a company that has greater transparency. I think like those numbers are really wild. And I don't know that I hear people talk about these kinds of metrics. And so like with respect to your study, like where are you getting interest from for like researchers around the world? Like what are some of the places where people have like have reached out to you from, or have downloaded your research? Who's interested? just Americans, just Gen Z Americans?
No, well, we know that pay transparency has been implemented in a lot of Scandinavian countries already, and Canada. And so I was able to see the readership download of my pilot study from all around the world, actually, like places like Tunisia, Brazil, Egypt, South Africa, Taiwan, and across the world. It's really neat to see like where the downloads are and like interest. And I've been reached out by a researcher in France even to see like if they could try to in a way replicate my study. And I think intent to apply is great too, and not to like talk negatively about it, but also once people are in the organization, like what is the organization doing to keep people happy and keep them to stay and remain at the organization? I think that's another part of the conversation that I haven't quite explored in my research, but that is, I think, intent to apply right now is really important because of the Great Resignation. Like a lot of organizations are trying to find ways to become more attractive so that they could have their pick of employees right now.
Yeah. I remember a conversation with a pay scale executive a couple of years ago, and the thing that's like really stayed with me over the years is that people care a little bit less that they're making market or above market salaries. They care more about transparency. They care more about how pay and compensation decisions are made, and the knowledge that those decisions are fair regardless of the level that you're at. And that was something that was really wild. And I think a lot about this current moment where there is a shortage, and employees essentially want a new social contract, and companies are doing so many things. But the thing that they could do to actually become more attractive is be more transparent with pay. And that's not something that they're doing as much, right? Like they'd rather pay people more or offer bonuses, but not make that information public. So we know that Scandinavian countries have shifted to greater pay transparency and pay equity. We know that there are laws in places in countries like New Zealand and the UK where employers have to report pay information. What about stateside? Like, who's doing what well?
Yeah, I think California was one of the first states to implement pay transparency law, but the most stringent one right now is from Colorado, where employers have to post pay bands on job descriptions. And I think they faced a bit of some backlash for that too, where employees but employers, sorry, decided to not recruit people from Colorado because they just didn't want to participate in publishing their pay bands. But I think that's sort of not being visionary, because as more and more states, like over 20 states right now, have started to implement a pay transparency policy, and it's a little regressive to try to think that you can avoid not being transparent anymore. So Washington, I think, also has a rule like that where the employees can look up the pay once they've become like hired, or during even at the job applicant stage, they can ask for that information.
Is there any company that's doing this really well?
Yes, I love to talk about Buffer. They practice radical transparency, and they publish the pay of all employees of the organization on a website that you and I can look up and see how much the CEO makes and how much the lowest paid employee makes. And we could even compare, what is the fraction between the highest paid and lowest paid, and see what the equity is for an organization like that. And I think it would be cool if I also said that they practice radical transparency as that's one of their values. And so they do that through everything that they do at the organization, and every strategy that they practice. It's not just regarding pay. And I think they have no problem hiring people. People like to work for a company that treats them with dignity and with respect, that we're all adults, that you can treat me with this information of how you decided or came up to this pay decision. And that's what people really want, just to be seen and to be thought of as human beings. It's just such a low bar.
Yeah, it's such a low bar. And I think that, at least in my experience, a lot of times people will reach out to me and say, hey, can you post this job in your network, or can you share this job with people, especially asking me for diverse candidates, which I think we can have a whole 80-minute conversation about, right? When people use diverse to signify non-white. And my response, I think for years, probably 4 or 5 years now, has been, I'm happy to share anything with my network, but you need to have the pay band or the range on the JD. If you don't have it, then I can't share it with my network. And a lot of times people write back to me and say, well, that's really divisive. We wouldn't do that. And so I'm just curious, right? Are there institutions that Buffer is a great example, right? But are there institutions?
Oh, so many others. Whole Foods has been doing this since the 80s, 40 years ago. Whole Foods has it where internally you can look up everyone's pay, and it's a tactic to also motivate employees to get that promotion if they want to get higher pay. And so many Starbucks also doesn't discriminate against people who discuss pay, because honestly, people are already looking on Glassdoor, levels.fyi, pay scale, and they're finding this information through back channels, and it just would be more beneficial for organizations and employers to get ahead of it and publish that information and be in control of the messaging.
Yeah. Ding, ding, ding. It's common sense. And the government does it. And the government does it, right? And the government has been doing it for a very long time. King County does it. The federal government does it. The state government does it. The pay information is always in the job application. You can look up, find it by role, find it by person. And I don't think the government is out there saying, oh, well, we won't get great qualified candidates if we don't publish our pay. Right? It's a really desirable place for a lot of people to work at, is the government.
Mm-hmm. And sorry, I'm very focused on private sector, but yes, in the public sector, all that information is public, and you can also look up by name to see people's base salary and their potential bonuses even. And then all that information is public. We're already practicing it. It's just some resistance from the private sector. I think I have a stat that only 17% of private sector jobs are promoting pay transparency. And this is a statistic from 2018. I have a feeling that that might be a little higher now, but not so high because of a lot of states mandating more pay transparency on job descriptions. But
is it 17%, 17?
Yes.
Only 17%. That obviously has to change, right? Because the vast majority of people are employed by the private sector. Okay, as we start to wrap up, can you tell us, what does pay transparency look like in practice, right? Like, what are like 3 to 5 things it looks like that people can do today?
Mm-hmm. I think you could first start by asking your employees through a basic survey or focus group to see what they prefer in their organization. Like, obviously what I'm offering is a one size fits all, but you could start by asking your employees directly, like, what do they want? What do they prefer of like level of pay transparency? Because it's a spectrum, it's a whole continuum of what could be. And so, you know, it could be very basic where you're just publishing the base salary of pay bands on your job descriptions, or it could be, you know, on the very extreme end, like Buffer, where they're offering the pay associated with a name and state or a city that the employee is working in, and offering other things like stock options, like what is that looking like, bonuses based on performance, and also like communicating how those decisions were made. That's the fairness piece that you kind of touched on too. It's called information justice, is like being privy to how those decisions are made. And then making sure that your company is aligning to its strategic goals. Like, how is the pay framework connected to the like pay strategy that you're pursuing, and that making sure that the pay for performance link is like fair also. And then gradually, you know, you can have a goal of, this is our 5-year plan. We like hope to complete like a pay audit this year, look to see what we can do to fix any inequity, and then next year we'll do this. So gradually roll out the changes. Don't try to do everything immediately. Like, I think a lot of organizations are trying to just do everything, do all, but it's not feasible. And so, you know, I think employees are just happy to see that there's transparency, that the organization is trying to do something to change about that, and have a 5-year plan. That is also a great plan as well.
I love that. Okay, folks that are watching, start planning, because people are going to start asking for it more and more. And I think the one thing that everybody can and should do today is at least publish a pay band when you post a job, right? Like, it doesn't have to be an absolute number. It can be a range, and it's likely a range, but share that with people so that as they're applying for jobs, and this is something, you know, coming from the nonprofit sector, I so wished that I had known what the pay range was before I applied for a job, instead of finding out at the end of 6 interviews that it was like 10,000 or 50,000 less than what I needed to survive in a city like Seattle, right? Like, I probably never have joined that process. Like, I would probably never have applied if I'd known what the pay range was. So Fee, thank you so much. I know that we chatted about like findings from your pilot study today, and you're going to have more data to share. And so I'm excited for you to dig into that. This is Fee's model. Do you want to quickly just share what this means?
Yes. So this is what I talked about briefly earlier. The pay transparency on one end could lead to fairness. Leading to applying to the organization. So in short, like how pay transparency could trigger more applications from people who are looking for jobs.
I love that. Okay, we know there's a link between greater transparency and people applying to jobs at your company. Fee, thank you so much.
Thank you.
And everybody watching, have a great day.
Bye.